What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben, and welcome back to the bench for another episode of our F4D-1 Skyray here on Ben Builds with Joe. We're going to go ahead and finish off the cockpit, get that buttoned up into the front nose, and move on with the wings and all the little details here and there. So let's go ahead and dive in first with some extra detail painting. First things first, guys, I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of Olive Drab by Vallejo. I want to go ahead and paint the shroud that sits at the very bottom of the flight control stick. Now, granted, I should have done this before I actually glued it in place, but oh well, it's all good. It is what it is. This is the color we're going to be using. Looks okay. Go ahead and grab a paintbrush and get this painted on. I've seen a couple of different reference photos. Sometimes they tend to be a grayish color. Other times I've seen them a bit more olive drab. So I don't really know what's correct here. So we're just going to stick with the olive drab and hope that works. Keep it thinner to almost act as a wash to keep that black showing through. And I think we're good to go. Also, I want to go ahead and paint the rear section right behind the pilot. I want to paint that flat black. So let's go ahead and jump into our first time lapse. Do the last bit of cockpit painting, get a flat coat all over the interior, add in some nose weight, get it mounted into the nose, maybe work a little bit more on a couple of sub-assemblies and get this party started, guys. Can't wait to get this going. Let's see what we can do. All right, everybody, so we are back and the cockpit's looking pretty good, considering it's basically right out of the box with a little bit of extra spare scratch building here and there. It looks okay. I'm happy with it. So I've got that flat coat drying and we're just going to leave it off camera and we're going to turn our attention over to the wings. Now, the one thing we have to go ahead and do here is decide on the ordnance. And the majority of references I have found show that the Skyray had three main things. It always had its wing drop tanks. It most of the time had its navigation pod there on the centerline pylon, and it typically had the wing pylons for the rocket pods, but it didn't always carry the rocket pods themselves. That's something that is a bit hit or miss. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to open up the locating holes for those particular pylons, but I don't know if I'm going to go ahead and install the weapon pods themselves. I might leave those off. Also, some of the references do show that the front of the pylons had a small silver strip, like a leading edge, but I don't know if my particular version has that, so we're going to go ahead and leave that off for right now. We're just going to open up the holes until we can figure out the paint. We're also going to go ahead and work on the landing gear bays, and I've been thinking about that, and I don't really want to go ahead and put a bunch of piping and wiring into them because you're not really going to see them. Most of the references I have found show that when the landing gears are deployed, the landing gear bay doors seem to be closed, at least the main doors. So you're not really going to go ahead and see a lot of detail. So instead, we're going to go ahead and just install the sidewalls and just call it a day. And Tamiya has done a very interesting job of giving you these multi-part sidewalls. First off, we have the inner walls, and those are separate pieces. So we'll go ahead and glue those down. No problem there. Those actually are keyed, and they have a small tab that goes ahead and fits into the front bulkhead. And that bulkhead then acts as the very front of those gear bays. A very unusual design, but that's okay. For one thing, it's going to be very sturdy, so that's awesome. Now we'll go ahead and grab that center bulkhead. It has a little bit of the engine fan detail. So I don't know how much you're really going to be able to see of that, but it's there just in case you want it. We're going to go ahead and lock those into place, make sure all the tabs are lined up, and then secure the inner gear bay walls right to the back of that bulkhead. So that looks pretty good. No problem whatsoever. Should get that nicely locked into place. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about the wings. Tamiya has you build the center portion of the wing, and then they have you build the wing tips as separate parts. The reason they do that is because you can actually build this with folded wings. I don't really want to do that. Instead, I want to build them deployed. So that's what we're going to work on. But I have heard that depending on how these all go together, you can sometimes have a little bit of a step between the inner wing and the outer wing tips. So to avoid that, I'm going to go ahead and try something I've done before in other builds. We're going to attach the top part of the wing tip to the top part of the main wing and the bottom part to the bottom part of the wing. I think that's going to be a good way to go ahead and alleviate any potential for a step from inner wing to outer wing tip. I don't know if it's going to work 100%, but we'll go ahead and test fit that, and it looks pretty good. It looks like it lines up really, really well, and it's actually a very nice secure fit. So I think we're going to go ahead and jump into our time lapse, and we're going to glue the bottom part of the wing tips to the bottom part of the main center wing, and then the top part. Let's go ahead and just try it out. If it doesn't work, oh well, live and learn, but I think this is going to work out great. Go ahead and dive in there, guys, and see what we can do. The only thing I have to worry about is the dihedral. I'm going to be on the lookout for that, but otherwise, a little bit of Tamiya extra thin. The locating tab should be perfect. Let's get it done, see how it works. Now moving on, guys, let's take a look at the engine, or at least the cone of the engine here for the rear part of the tail. We have a little bit of very softly molded detail to give it, I guess, some detail around the aperture. What we have here in the kit is okay, but it's not as accurate as it could be. So I think a little bit of scratch building should hopefully liven it up and make it look a little bit better. Before we do any of that, though, I do have to make sure that we glue in that rear faceplate for the engine. Now, to make the scratch built detail, first thing I have to do is figure out the inner diameter. And since I can't really measure the inside, we're going to measure the outside and then reduce it by the thickness of the plastic. So I'm assuming like 1 millimeter or 2. That should at least give us a rough estimate for the diameter, and we can use that to go ahead and cut some actual strips of styrene. Then we can just start gluing things on the inside. We don't have to fool around too much with, cutting some styrene, measuring it, trying to get it in there, cutting it more, having to go back and redo it a bunch of times. This way, we should hopefully be a bit more accurate and efficient. Now that I have the basic length, I'm going to go ahead and cut a little strip of styrene. We're going to go about 2 to 3 millimeters. And that's going to act as a bit more detail and also as a stop for each of the engine pedals that I'm going to go ahead and cut out of styrene. Then we'll just glue it in place. And again, like I said, this will act as not only detail, but also as a stop to go ahead and slide our different scratch build details right up against there, butt them up, and we'll be good to go with that. Not too bad. Let's go ahead and burnish it down and move on to the actual pedals themselves. Now to do that, I've got a piece of wax paper that I'm going to just kind of trace out. And then we're going to cut that down to the shape and size, and that's going to be probably pretty efficient. Once we have that cut, we'll transfer it over to a piece of styrene as our very first test subject. I think it's going to be good. All right, we've got our styrene cut into the shape and size. Let's go ahead and test fit that. Okay, yeah, That looks pretty cool. So that actually works really, really well. We have one piece that I'm perfectly fine with. We'll use that as our template and we'll make about 8 of these pieces all together and we'll glue them inside. Just systematically work our way around the inside of that eyelet. Also, I want to go ahead and do some installation on some of the vents. I want to do some test fitting. I want to work on that rear trim flap, try to see if I can't get that set up and ready to go. And then I think we'll be good for today. So we'll go ahead and call it quits. So back into that time lapse, guys. Let's go ahead and push on, work more on that engine, get some parts and pieces installed, and see what we can do. Let's do it, guys. Let's keep it rolling. And we are back with all the parts and pieces we worked on today. As you can see, we've got the wings, we've got that rear flap area, and of course we have the cockpit. The cockpit is done. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. I'm going to show you a close-up here and you can see the detail. You can see the seat belts I got in there, the oxygen hose that I have in there. We've got some of the scratch-built wires and whatnot. I've dry brushed those with some light gray, so that really kind of pops there without being too much in your face. I did a little bit of gloss work right there on the radar scope, even though there should actually be like a square section right in the middle that's gloss. I think they built a periscope to aid the pilot in viewing that radar because it's kind of obscured by the control stick. But I didn't want to fool with that, so I think this is good enough. Everything else looks okay. I like it. The wings themselves turned out to be great. I don't have any sort of step from inner wing to outer wing tips. That looks perfect. When I go ahead and mate them down on top of each other, everything lines up, and a little bit of cleanup there on the main portion of the body should help to make sure that these have a perfect dihedral and they look good. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I've heard a little bit of some issue with the wing leading edges, and I can see, yeah, a little bit of work will need to be done, but otherwise, I think they look pretty good. Which brings, of course, over to these rear trim flaps. Now, I don't know exactly if that's the technical term for these, but these are a real pain, guys. They don't really want to fit very nicely up inside where they're supposed to go. Also, if you think about it, if you want to go ahead and just glue them in like this, perfectly level with the wing, that's not much of an issue. But I want to go ahead and cant them upwards, because most of the references I have seen shows these to be slightly canted upward. So I want to go ahead and do that here on the model, which of course really complicates matters because they don't really want to fit in there very easily. So a lot of sanding or dry fitting is going to have to be done. Also, if you think about it, if you get these glued into place, it's going to obscure that rear section. And there is an area that's painted silver on the back there. So that's going to be really hard to go ahead and get that done as well. On my references, you can see what I'm talking about here with these, the wings themselves in the very back, these little trim flaps, they're canted canted upwards at a pretty drastic angle. If we go ahead and open it up, look through all the different pictures, you can see a lot of the aircraft themselves when they're parked. That's going to be a really cool look when they're sitting on the ground, and I want to go ahead and see if I can replicate that here on the model. So it's going to be challenging, but we're going to think on it, see what we can come up with. And lastly, I did work on the engine. We added in all of those little styrene scratch-built pedals there on the back of the aperture. I don't know if those are the technical terms, mind you. I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, but I think they look pretty good. And they add a little bit of detail without being overly dramatic. And again, you're not going to see a whole lot there on the engine face itself. So it's just enough detail that when it's plugged into the back of the fuselage, you can get a little extra detail and you're good to go. Pretty easy upgrade as well. I think next episode, we're going to go ahead and start working on some seams. There are some seams here that I need to go ahead and sand down for the front nose and the cockpit area. I need to go ahead and also glue this very back part, but I wanted to leave that unglued right now, thinking that maybe that might help when I go ahead and mate the nose to the wing. There is a bit of a gap right there, and no, Joe mentioned it, and I see it too, so I might want to go ahead and see what I can do to eliminate that gap as much as I can. So we're good for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to go check out Joe's channel. Make sure to check out his Skyray. His Skyray is looking awesome. Really, really cool upgrade with that seat, and it's coming along. He's not going to have a video up this week, but that's okay. As usual, that gives us a little bit of time to catch up. But that is it, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here on episode number 4. Until our next episode, you know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool. And we'll see you back here on episode number 5 for Ben Builds with Joe and our 1/48 scale Skyray by Tamiya. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you soon.